You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. My name is Carolee Culpepper, and I'm here with Dale Sellers, our executive director. Dale, how are you today?
You know, I'm just enjoying the low-key, low-paced lifestyle of being 3 weeks out from Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
I know you and I were talking before we began that how there's really not anything going on in your life and you're not busy. And I'm actually packing up next week and going to Montana for a few days to hang out with Montana Hannah, our daughter.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of
That'll
crazy.
Be great.
It's kind of a crazy season as we record this. We're in second week of December already.
I know. It's crazy. I know. We've got a bunch going on the next, I was just telling you, 10 days or so. And then a few days before Christmas where everything kind of drops off the mat, which is good. I'm hoping for a few days to just kind of relax with my family. So
don't you have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old?
I do. I mean, well, relax is relative, I guess. I mean, you know, whatever you do to relax with a first grader and a K3. So, but have fun no matter what.
They never get excited about Christmas.
Oh my gosh.
Well, today's kind of Christmassy for me because of our guests. If you've ever been to our one-day conference, I want to read a quote that we read this quote when we do our communications piece. And it says, culture is like gravity. We can spend our whole lives fighting against it. We can ignore its implications, or we can learn how to leverage it. And that's by a guy named Gavin Adams, which we always say our friend Gavin Adams. Well, today we actually have our friend Gavin Adams on the podcast. Gavin, how you doing, man? Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm doing great. I hope you guys are well too. Christmas is insane for all of us, which is, I guess, weird. We call Jesus the Prince of Peace, and nothing about this. It feels peaceful. It's so funny. True. So my wife and I just bought a coffee shop a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
And I'm in this new consulting coaching business as well. So we're launching 2 new endeavors, basically in and around the Christmas season, which was a massive mistake, but we are figuring it out.
Merry Christmas to you.
That's how it feels. We told our kids this would be a Christmas they'll tell their kids about, because it was the one that kind of didn't happen. So we literally went to buy a Christmas tree yesterday my wife loves the live Christmas trees. We get it flocked, the whole deal. I'm telling you, we showed up yesterday way late, right? Where you typically have done this 2 weeks ago, maybe. Yeah. There was not a single tree in the entire Christmas tree farm, all gone.
They're
completely gone. So we have laughed our way through the early stages of Christmas.
We noticed here at our local place, we always go the Sunday or Saturday after Thanksgiving. Typically the Sunday because I hunt on Saturday. But anyway, we go and we noticed that the amount of trees was less because people because of the season of not Christmas, but COVID and all that stuff and the shutdown, I think people just ready to party and, have Christmas and get it going. People like Austin Savage actually put up their Christmas tree before Thanksgiving, which.
I do too. I'm okay with it too. I embrace that.
You guys amaze me. So anyway, Gavin, take a moment here if you would, and just let everybody get to know who you are a little bit. Tell us.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I'll make it as quick as I can. Best part of it, I've been married for 25 years and married my high school sweetheart. We dated for 6 years and got married on the 6-year anniversary of our first date. So
wow,
it was fun. It was a Friday night in January. So we've married 25 years. We have 4 kids. My oldest is 22. She's actually in seminary right now. Doing that with DTS. And North Point Ministries. They have a residency program. So shout out to those guys. They do a great job with residency. So she gets paid a little bit of money because to go to seminary as a part of that. So that's exciting. I've got a 20-year-old son at Auburn. He's a junior-ish. This is when you get in college. Your number of hours, your ish something. So War Eagle, I could care less about Auburn, but where your treasure is, your heart is also. So we've become a big Auburn fan because they have a lot of our treasure. And I have 2 at home still. I have a senior in high school son who's graduating here soon. He actually is going to go to business school in Barcelona next year. He's an entrepreneur already.
Barcelona.
5 or 6 businesses. That guy is. He's a little version of me as a kid. So he's doing that. And then I have an 8th grade daughter who is still very, very sweet. We'll see how long that lasts. But it's awesome. It's awesome to have her around. So she's 14, just turned 14. But I grew up in Atlanta, actually. I live in Atlanta still, so I'm a native to Atlanta. Not many of those people around. I've suffered through all the Atlanta sports my whole life. But we won the World Series, so we're living on that.
Oh, that was so fun to watch.
So there'll be, it'll be 25 years before something bad happens again, but that's okay. So I grew up here though. Went to college, and really all I cared about was making money. As I said, I was an entrepreneur. Even as a second grader, I bought now and laters in bulk and sold them individually. So I've always had businesses that I've been running my entire life. And so making money was my sole goal. I really wanted to be an artist. I was a cartoonist and graphic artist and all that through, as my childhood and through high school and all that. But man, I kept hearing the word starving artist, but I never heard starving marketing guy. So I decided to study marketing in college. A year out, wasn't really, everybody's disenfranchised out of college with their first jobs and all that. Yeah. So I thought it'd be better. So went to Georgia State in downtown Atlanta. I got an MBA, which really helped kind of launch me on a better path. But again, it was just all about chasing money. Mm-hmm. But a few years into working at a big consulting firm, I just realized this is not what I want to do. So I went into business with my father. Actually, he had a small business. We kind of grew it into a marketing agency. With my backgrounds, that was something that was perfect for me to do too. So I got to do that for a while, and we were incredibly successful in this business, but I was miserable. I'm sure all of us have felt that before, where you should be happy and you're not. Things are not going well. And really what it was just God pulling me out of the marketplace to get involved in ministry. My wife and I had been volunteering in church. We've been in church our whole life. I became a believer at 7, but I've been there since, I was negative 9 months old. So church is just like our DNA, but being involved is a part of it too. We just don't know how to not participate. It's what we do. So we're like the perfect church person. We love being involved. So my wife is running a, huge women's ministry at our church, local church, and I'm involved in middle school ministry. I won't bore you with those details. I did not want to do it, and fell in love with it 2 weeks in. And we had grown this middle school ministry from maybe 30, 40 kids to about 150 in a couple of years. And wow. I could not get enough of it. And so I've outsourced my entire business. And now I'm wondering if I should go into ministry. But what kind of, church is going to hire a guy with an MBA? I don't even think you can work at a church if you're a business guy. It's kind of what I'm thinking, right? Yeah. So, but how God is, he orchestrates it, and we figured it out. So I got to help launch a church in the south side of Atlanta. I worked with a guy named Chris Patton. He took a big risk and hired a business guy who had no idea how to pastor. I just knew how to lead. I knew how to build and innovate and grow. That's what I knew how to do. So he hired me. I got to work there for 3 years. And then there was a church in North Atlanta where I live now in Woodstock. Back then it was called Watermark Church. Today it's called Woodstock City Church. But it was a partnership church of North Point Ministries. But it was a dying church. I didn't know this term, but they were hiring me to be a revitalization pastor. That's what my doctorate is in. It's church revitalization. But I had no idea that was a term back then. I just knew that this was an incredible community with great opportunity, and they just needed somebody to come in and help lead and help figure out what God was trying to do. So we decided to take our 3 years of ministry experience, which is not much professionally, and come up here and try to lead this church. And so my first Sunday was in, November 16th, 2008. We came up. We had actually it wasn't that tiny of a church, all things considered. But it was 3 years old. I was the third lead pastor in 3 years. So you can imagine lots of turmoil, lots of culture, lots of issues. Hence the quote on culture you read. But we had $400 in the bank my very first Sunday. And so anyway, it was a fantastic opportunity to watch God show off a little bit and have a front row seat for all of it. So I've been here for 13 years at that church. 2 years in, we were adopted or hostilely taken over, however you'd want to say it, by North Point Ministries with Andy Stanley and those guys. We're about 40 minutes due west of Alpharetta, where their original location is. So as we got healthy and started seeing a lot of growth, we just began having conversations about what makes the most sense, because we were a partnership church with those guys anyway. So 2 years into my time, we became a campus. And so I was the lead pastor of that campus location, obviously served with Andy on the leadership team at North Point Ministries with vision and mission and all that good stuff with him for a long time. But I rolled out of that in August. So August of this year, August 2021, August 1st was my last Sunday. as lead pastor. I just felt that season was coming to an end for a while. I wasn't sure what that meant or what to do, but you know how this is. You don't often know what God's, where he's leading, but you kind of know the first step is just saying yes to the very first thing. And the first thing was just deciding that this season was ending. So I spent about 6-8 months probably working with Andy and Lane Jones and several of our, good friends over there. That organization is so fantastic with that. I got to extrovert for 9 months about leaving and thinking about it. And they let me process that out loud with them and work through it. So, which also allowed us to transition to the lead pastor at Woodstock City in a really healthy way. A guy who I hired 7 years ago and loved to death. So I get to transition everything to him over the summer, and we get to celebrate that together and really do it in a great way. So now I'm out consulting with organizations, businesses, and a lot of obviously ministry organizations, churches, and coaching leaders, primarily around innovation all the way through implementation. One of the things I learned in my, business programming and all my business work, and this is true in ministry too, it's just how hard it is to implement strategy.
Amen.
It's not crazy difficult to develop a strategy. There's lots of consulting organizations or even just a lot of strategic thinkers who can do that on their own. But we also know we all have a lot of 3-ring binders sitting on our shelf. So helping leaders really go from where they are to where they feel like God has led them to be, but they just don't know how to get there. Yeah. So I'm doing a lot of that right now. So that's a quick backstory on how we got to where we are.
Well, we do, our focus at 95 Network is the small and the mid-sized church. And one of the things that we do, I created my own thing called Vision Day, which is a strategic planning retreat. We do a 1-day thing with churches. And we actually, the reason that it's kind of taken root in the churches is because we put dates of when they're supposed to meet and dates when it's supposed to be finished and dates when it's supposed to be implemented and hopefully a date when they'll actually follow through. Because in the small church, the typical thing is we don't follow through and there's no accountability for it. So we can say we're going to do lots of things. But then when we don't do those things, there never seems to be any consequences.
Well, and the reality is that, this is a difference between leadership and management, right? Leadership is the creation, innovation, it's the growth orientation stuff, but management is about orchestrating what has been innovated and created in the past. And so in most churches, and it's so cyclical, every 7 days, right? We have this massive orchestration activity that has to happen. And in smaller churches, typically it's the senior pastor, and you don't have a staff of 70 to help you with that. So you are spending 95% of your time orchestrating. So to pull away from all that management duty to then do leadership stuff, it's almost impossible, which I think is why a lot of the strategies are fantastically thought through and aren't implemented, because there just is often not enough time to figure out how to do that.
And typically too, we don't, in the small church, we don't want to get into all this today, but we don't raise up leaders. We don't equip, because and a lot of times doing everything fills our emotional tank.
Right.
So
there is some identity issue and all that.
That's kind of where the lid is.
I know. I was at a conference earlier this week, speaking on delegation, which sounds really boring, doesn't it? But
I was just thinking, I wish I'd been there.
But talking through the delegation
actually, I'm gonna send Carolee, would you go?
Really delegate me to do your delegating.
but talking through, and really it's about systems delegation. So how do we create clarity and all that with it? But what was interesting about it is it was a business conference, but all these business leaders thinking about how they are the lid for their organization, to use John Maxwell's term, because they're trying to do everything and they're only good at a couple of things anyway. And so anyway, that's probably tangential.
Gavin, I'll tell you what
has
blown my mind as I have now turned 60 next year, and I've been in ministry for 40 years, probably around the 10-year marks when I learned about Maxwell and the stuff he was teaching in Hybels and all the gurus, Rick Warren. The thing that has blown my mind, and I don't have an answer for it, is they begin to address the fact we've got to learn how to lead, we got to develop leadership and all that stuff, how we still don't do it in the church, but they don't do it in the world either. I mean, it's amazing to me how few organizations are led well. And what I mean by that is, they may be led well now, but you're not successful unless you raise up successors. Just like what you just shared, you have literally just done at your church. You guys raised up somebody, handed that thing off to them. And I'm just still amazed at the fact we don't do that. Today we reached out to you, one, because you've been an influencer through our ministry in a way, but you wrote an article recently, and when you wrote the article, I emailed you the day you wrote the article and said, "Hey man, could you come on our podcast?" The title of your article was "When Interruptions Become Disruptions." And, we discussed this before we began off air that, there's just a lot of churches that are kicking and screaming, trying to get back to the way things were. And I loved your article. I loved the points in it. And so Carolee and I wanted to kind of walk through that with you today. Can you kind of just give us the background of it a little bit?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I wrote it because I was working with some churches who kept saying that all they were thinking about is how quickly can we get everybody back, which I thought that's a terrible goal, because now you have become so insider focused that you will eventually die a slow, painful death because all you care about is who isn't here, who used to be here, not all the unchurched people who are looking for help and hope. So that bothered me. And then the second thing is that, and it's connected to it, hearing all these church leaders kept saying that when things get back to normal, and I thought, what world are you living in where you think things are going to get back to normal? I'm a little leery of anybody who uses the word post-pandemic right now. I don't even know that we're going to have a post-pandemic. Right. I think that, well, we actually, if you say you're post-pandemic, you have to say because it's now endemic. It's not pandemic. So we're still in the middle of this thing that's not going to go away anytime soon, and it may never go away. Meaning that. And especially all the things that it accelerated, the post-Christian, modern culture, the cultural Christianity, the death of that, the mobilization of people, all of that is just gotten accelerated through it. So this idea of somehow 2019 is going to come back is I just think bad thinking, A, and B, if we're really honest, a lot of us weren't that successful in 2019.
Now you're preaching.
And so to say that we want to get back to what we were doing, gosh, I kind of, it sounds weird to say, I kind of like the fact we had a pandemic to force us to rethink and give us space to rethink. Because it's hard enough, as I mentioned, this leadership management kind of conundrum, it's hard enough to change and innovate when every 7 days there's the big event you have to orchestrate. We have a gift right now where there's this gap of time where we can rethink some things, retool, innovate, and launch different approaches. And if they don't work, it's the best time, I think, to fail.
It's okay.
It's the best time to try and to take some risks that might not work because you're going to stumble upon things that do. So really that's, Dale, to your question, that's what led to me writing. It's not a massive article, but it's what led me to writing about the difference in interruption and disruption. And the quick difference, interruptions are like pause buttons, and they allow you to take catch your breath. It's like a sabbatical, or, you preach 52 times a year, but you bring in a guest for 2 Sundays. That's a pause button. It's an interruption, and it gives you a chance to think, to have a moment of introspection, to evaluate how things are going. And really out of that, introspection, you make some tweaks. You don't make massive changes typically because you're about to hit the play button again, and you're going to play what you were doing before you hit pause. That's what interruptions are good for. The problem is that disruptions can look like interruptions, but they're not pause buttons. They're complete game changers, right? They change everything. And that's what the pandemic obviously has been, but it isn't just the viral pandemic. The political pandemic, the racial pandemic, the anger pandemic, there's about a dozen of these that have all been highly disruptive. They're not interruptions for us. They have completely changed the way people think, has changed habit patterns, has changed everything about it. Think about it, Dale, like Carolee, for about a year, right? In some cases, maybe 9 months. In some cases, it's been a year and a half or more where people weren't actively engaged in the local church, meaning that every single one of us came back as church planters. Every one of us are church planters now. And everyone who is attending our church is de-churched because they spent so much time not attending and engaged. Even if they were online, it's just not the same. We know that. So their habit patterns, everything about them, it is a complete disruption. And so hence I decided to write a little bit about that.
I love how you said in the article, disruptions bring obstacles that we must reframe as opportunities.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a really great kind of way to shift the mentality of this being something that is just going to ruin everything and to take it into something that is just a great opportunity?
Well, every time we bump into things that are obstacles, I mean, our tendency is, right, to just be frustrated, to feel defeated by it, and to really allow it to get the best of us, when the reality is most of these obstacles, not everyone, most obstacles are actually opportunities to learn something new, to try something different, to innovate, to test. And that's really what this has been, an elongated opportunity to try to figure out how to reach people and disciple people in a brand new kind of normal that we're living in.
See, what you're hanging on right there, as you guys were talking to that, I'm thinking through, I've seen 2 reports where 80% of pastors are thinking about quitting. And we've seen lots of discouragement as I've been back out doing conferences this fall. A lot of that comes from the fact that they didn't know what to do, right? Being a church planter. Dude, that was this whole podcast was worth you saying that, is that we've got to shift our mentality and from the way things have always been, and we are all church planters, and
every one of us.
It's led to a lot of the discouragement that a lot of the folks are feeling. So you talked about what happens when a leader interprets a disruption as an interruption. Kind of talk through that for us a minute.
Well, when a leader misinterprets it, what happens is the world around us is constantly evolving and changing. Jack Welch it's one of my favorite quotes in the world. If the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. That's Jack Welch.
Man, that sounds like that would go for a lot of churches.
Yeah, well, that's why I love that quote.
Yeah,
that's why I love that quote so much. And so I think if I remember, I included it in the article, but that's what happens in a disruption. The rate of change on the outside is exceedingly fast in a disruption. It's always fast, right? Our communities are always changing, evolving rapidly, and it's not slowing down. It's getting faster. Well, a thing like a pandemic, any sort of crisis does a couple of things. It reveals what's actually true, right? We all saw that in this crisis, how bad we've done at discipling people, how little discipleship has actually been done. We all got to see that. So that's one. And then 2, it accelerates things. It accelerates trends. It rarely creates new trends, but it accelerates existing trends. And so the rate of change, accelerated dramatically on the outside of our churches. And so therefore, if you interpret that though as an interruption, where it isn't changing anything, it's just a pause, and we're all going to go back to exactly the way things were, it's not actually true. And so when you misinterpret that, you end up attempting to implement an outdated strategy or model in a world of where that model was highly designed for a time that has now gone by. That's what happens when you come out of a disruption and you interpret it as an interruption. But if you see it as a disruption, you are more able to open your hands to your current strategies, let go of the things that got you here. And we know that what got you here doesn't get you there. And so let go of the things that and this is hard because a lot of those things you created, like you designed the strategies, right? Even if you didn't make it up by yourself, you implemented it, you figured out how to contextualize it yourself. Let go of that completely, start over. It's that, only the paranoid survive idea that if a brand new pastor were to walk into your church today, what would they do? And if they would do something different, you should do that. You should walk out, you should walk back in and do it differently. So, and I think that's the power of thinking like a church planter right now. A church planter walks into a community. They're so investigative about the community. They're trying to meet and learn and find out what's happening in the community. What's the best ministry model to serve this community that I am hoping to launch and plant a church in, right? So if we have that mentality now in the midst of this massive, massive disruption, it allows us to let go of all the things that we were doing and then figure out what church needs to look like today in light of everything that has changed in and around us.
I've been saying for a while that I think what happens is when you are faced with a new situation where you don't know what to do, you tend to go to your default.
Sure.
Because your default makes you feel safe.
And our default is what we know.
Yes, it makes you feel safe. It's something you know, and you're comfortable leading there. The problem that we're facing today, and this has just been a reality. The reality is what the pandemic has done because our stadiums are full, our malls are full, concerts are full, everything in society is full, but the church, it has shown us we weren't engaging to start with.
It's cultural. It's cultural
yes.
Christianity. You feel like you, at least in some areas of the country, this isn't true everywhere, but you feel like you need to have an answer to where do you go to church, and so you go every once in a while, but you're not really engaged. You're not participating.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you think great content is the answer, right? That's not the answer, because content is just a commodity.
It's
you can
everywhere.
get content anywhere you want, anytime you want, and so and that's my point about it being a disruption. It has evolved the model of ministry. Now, I do think there's guys like Ed Setzer who would tell you, and I think they're right about this, oftentimes on the heels, on the other side of these major disruptions, things do return to normal in some ways, but not in every way. Yeah. And so I think that's what we're going to see. Like, for instance, I would never argue that we need to become the Amazon of church, where everything is digital now. I don't think that's the future of church. I don't think eyeball to eyeball should ever be replaced in totality. Right. However, if you aren't figuring out a way to become hybrid, and hybrid is not keep doing what you did physically and throw Instagram on it. That's not hybrid. Hybrid is when.
Wait a minute. Say that again.
Yeah. Well, no. This is what happens in churches. That people say, well, we started live streaming our services on Facebook and we opened an Instagram account, so now we're hybrid. Like, that's not hybrid. That's lazy.
Well, see, the reason I want you to double down there a little bit is because I literally have done over my shoulder. You'll see I have these things called small church strategies, and I did one on hybrid church. And what I'm telling churches is this: you need to have the best in-person experience possible within your context, and you need to be the best online you can. And most churches in our community here at 95 Network, we've got to get them to quit thinking it's either or. It's both. It's both and.
Well, that's what hybrid is.
Yes, you got to do both.
Well, and here's the thing about this is a whole nother. I'm working with a ton of churches right now on this, and there's some cohorts that I'm doing group, learning on it. Actually, just did one yesterday with some guys in the UK. I guess 8 or 10 churches in the UK. And the thing about hybrid is, if you look at the scientific definition of hybrid, it gives such clarity. It's the marrying together of two disparate origin stories to create something new, a fresh expression. So a hybrid church isn't an old way of doing something with added on digital elements. That's not hybrid.
So good.
What a hybrid church is digital and physical components coming together to create an integrated, fresh expression. Now, again, there's a whole hour or two we could do on that. But so when you think about hybrid,
we'll have him back in to do an entire podcast on what he just said.
what a hybrid church, and this is why the disruption is so helpful in a way. If you think of it as an opportunity, Carolee, like we mentioned earlier, it gives us an opportunity to not just keep doing Sunday in person the way we've always done it, because there are better ways of doing Sunday in person in a hybrid church model. And with the way that things have changed in our communities, if what you're doing is about content, not about experience, if it's about content, not about connection to your Heavenly Father and connection to each other, why would I come? Because if it's missable, I'll just miss it. And too many of our church services are missable because they're not connective. They're not relationally driven. So figuring those kinds of things out. And by the way, we have 167 hours out every week outside of Sunday morning, the hour we spend at church. We have to figure out a way to leverage those hours for evangelism and discipleship, knowing that the more connected people are with the local church on Monday through Saturday, the odds of them remaining connected on Sunday are 100-fold, right?
Yes.
And so it's impossible to effectively disciple somebody anyway if all you're doing is Sunday morning for an hour and they show up 1.5 times a month. What do you got, 15 hours, 16 hours a year to disciple somebody? So that's why, not to get off on that, but that's why I feel like this disruption is so critical right now. It gives us an opportunity to probably do some things we should have been doing maybe from 2013, 14 on, but we were dragging our feet because we were experiencing some versions of success. And you know how this is. Success covers multitudes of sin. And when you are successful in the church, which typically is butts and dollars, right?
Yes.
So if the seats feel pretty full and you are able to pay your bills, you feel successful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means you don't want to disrupt the apple cart by trying to become hybrid or trying all these new strategies. Because what's going to happen if, the one or two big donors that you have get upset, right, and leave, which that's just scarcity mentality, leadership, but it's the way we often end up leading.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you say to, a smaller mid-sized church pastor who is experiencing this kind of disruption, but just feels like paralyzed by it, or like they're having to do all of the management, like you were saying, not enough time to do the leadership, they have strategy, but they don't really have a way to implement it. What would you say to them? Like where to start? What are a couple of easy things that they can?
Yeah. Well, can we talk about that just within the context of like the hybrid church for a minute?
Yes.
It doesn't take any extra money or resources to try to have better interactions and participation through conversation during your Sunday morning service. All church services look about the same, if we're honest. I mean, some of them are a little more, rambunctious than others, depending on where we are in the Pentecostal stuff or what have you, right? I mean, but the reality is that every church, almost every Sunday, has a version of a welcome, some music, some sort of transition, and a message. That's about the format of church. I think that in the new model, we got to figure out a way to create a lot more relational connection and conversation in that. So how do we have conversations during the welcome? I don't know that worship can be a conversation, but I think there can be more interaction in it. And then how do we preach from a way that creates space for God to do what only he can do through processing? And then how do we preach in a way that we can have conversation with people? So instead of standing up for 20 to 45 minutes, having a monologue with people, how do we have a dialogue? I just preached, I preach all the time. I'm traveling all the time and doing that. I was at a church, I guess 2 weeks ago. And I told them, I said, hey, they're primarily a video venue. And I said, I'm going to not just stand up here for 35-ish minutes and talk at people. I want to have a conversation with people. And so the entire time I'm preaching, I'm, saying, hey, well, but what do you think about, or let me give you 60 seconds to ask your neighbor about this question. And so we're just having conversation. That you can't do that online as well. And if you're not in the room, you miss that. So I think there's cheap solutions to some of these things that cost no money. But here's the other thing. I think we get overwhelmed because we think we should be doing all of it.
Yes.
Again, this is another hour podcast, because we won't do it. But when you look at, for instance, the digital side of a hybrid church, there are, we could list 25 different digital channels, and we feel like we should be swimming in all of them, right? It's like lane lines in an Olympic pool. We feel like we should be swimming in all the lane lines. The reality is that what we should do is understand how each of the lane lines, each of the channels is uniquely built and what it's built for. Pick one or two of them and be good at those and ignore the rest of them. No small church should be trying to use Pinterest. Like no small church should be, trying to record 5-minute versions of their message for YouTube that lead to 12-minute. That's a waste of everybody's time. You don't have time to do that. And by the way, I don't mean this rudely, but there's only one Life Church. There's only one Hillsong Church, and we're not it. So our goal is to be an incredible local church for our local community. So here in Woodstock, Georgia, when I was leading our local church here, if someone listened to us in Kentucky, sure. That's fine. But I'm not trying to make disciples in Kentucky. I don't have an effective way to do that. So I'm going to do everything I can to reach the people directly in my community. And I'm going to limit the channels I'm using so that I can do those effectively. Doing one or two things really, really well is significantly better than doing 8 things with mediocrity.
Well, what we always say at 95 Network is most small churches are known for doing 20 things poorly instead of 1 or 2 things well. And so you are pouring beautiful water in my soul right now. Because we love the local church and we love these pastors. And again, I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Stalled, Hope and Help for Pastors who thought they'd be there by now. And part of my problem was I always compared myself to everybody else.
Sure.
In fact, Gavin, I've told this story before, but if you and I had been friends before I started pastoring, and then I started my church at the same time you did, and your church was successful and mine wasn't, if I saw you at the local restaurant, if you didn't see me first, I'd duck out. I'd go somewhere else, not because of you, but because I was so ashamed of me.
Yeah.
And what I've discovered as I've gone through this process of writing the book and doing what we do at 95 Network, I was comparing myself to the church down the street that, they had all the resources, all the people. I didn't have all that stuff. I was when I pastored, I was in a remodeled furniture store.
Yeah.
It just was, we had a pew. We had a set of pews from a church in Massachusetts. They're curved pews and we have a flat, it's just a cement pad for the floor. And we had this one pew that we had a thing in the middle would make it rock. It would rock up and down. So every Sunday, my dad would sit on one end of it and the side of the pew would fall off. And it was like a gun went off in the church, And I'm just like, what am I doing? And again, I was just so embarrassed at where we were. And I think a lot of the folks that are part of our podcast audience feel that way too. And so I'm so thankful that the Lord just led you to say that again. It's better to do one or two things well, and it takes off the pressure.
And I think, don't you think too, the people in our churches, I feel like sometimes we're so afraid to call them to a life worthy of the calling they've received. And so many people, I was afraid to ask to help or, to get involved or whatever. Meanwhile, the bigger the ask, the more grateful they were. And because they felt like they were doing something that mattered. So I was scared to ask somebody to hold a door open, as a guest services person. Meanwhile, what I really had to learn to do was ask them to come every week and lead a small group for middle school boys in 6th grade. Nobody wants to do that, but be incredibly bold about it. And what I found is that people actually wanted to be asked and they wanted to be given responsibilities, delegation, by the way, but they wanted to be given responsibility and authority. They didn't want to just sit on the side.
Go a step further, brother. It's called equipping. That's
right.
That's what we are called to do. We're called to equip people, which means you train them, you help them, but you give them opportunities to do what the Lord created them to do.
But we're afraid we're going to run people off. And so we don't want to ask too much. We don't want to, and the reality is most times we ask way too little. Because when we ask too much without good vision and all that, obviously we're not doing it right. But when we ask people to do things that are significant to the kingdom, I think not only does that grow them in their discipleship journey, but it allows you to move into the things that you're uniquely gifted to do by outsourcing to others things they're uniquely gifted and want to do. But they're not going to come and beg you to do it because they're not sure that you even want them to. Again, we didn't talk about this. I didn't write this in an article. This for another day. But another thing that disruption has given us space to do, I think it's a personal disruption. I think it's given us space and time to really find out what's in us and what's driving us.
Oh yeah.
And it's not like it's in a way a weird forced sabbatical where and all of us probably were introspective for a minute. And this happens most of the times when there's a personal disruption. We flip over the rock of our heart and we see all those squiggly things, and then we just throw the rock back on as fast as we can because we don't want to deal with that, But I think the disruption what we should also do is use it for our personal health and our spiritual health and allow us, to your point, if we have those things in us that makes us want to run out of the restaurant when we see the mega church pastor walk in, get that junk out of our heart. Because let me tell you, I've been that mega church pastor. I mean, at Woodstock City, we had all the stuff. We had all the people, and I was a part of something that was even way bigger than that, right? And we all felt insecure. We still didn't have all the resources we felt we needed to do what we wanted to do because we're just people, and brokenness plays out the same way, no matter how big or small the problem is. And so we're not that much different. I think we're all trying to do the same things with the same insecurities and with the same enemy working against all of it.
Yeah, that's right. I heard somebody the other day on a podcast say we're all on the same team and we're all working against the same enemy. So
exactly right. Yeah. The competition is not the church, it's the lake and the vacation and really it's just the indifference. That's the competition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You're a kid. So we've got just a few minutes left and we're not going to make it through it, but it's fine. But in your article, you talked about how to make the most of a disruption. And it kind of head us in that direction, a smidgen, and we'll get as far as we can.
Yeah. Well, I think the making the most of the disruption is seeing it as an opportunity to change some things. And so if I remember in the article, I think we just talked about really some questions to ponder. Dale, is that kind of what you're thinking about?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Some questions to ponder as a part of it. So if you want to make the most of the disruption, I mean, we could give you 180 things that you could think about doing, but I mean, that's not that helpful. I think that really pausing for a minute to think about the questions that you should be asking of yourself and maybe of the team or the people around you during disruption will probably lead to the places that you need to go to actually leverage the disruption for what it is. Can I just read you the questions really quick, Dale? So number one, what kind of leader do you tend to be? Are you more apt to kind of open your hands and embrace innovation, or do you kind of close your fist and resist change? Not because you resist change, but what you actually do is resist loss. And change means you're going to lose something. And you probably just don't want to grieve loss. That's why you're bad at it. Number two, that's a whole nother podcast, by the way. We're
gonna have to schedule about 5 or 6 more podcasts.
We're gonna just do the Gavin Adams 95 Network podcast.
There's people better than me at all these things, but change resistance is an interesting topic. Two, how have you labeled the pandemic? And are you describing it internally and externally as an interruption or a disruption? I mean, how you think about it is going to dictate how you treat it. Number three, to what extent have you tried forcing your previous model into these current circumstances? I think that's a great question to ask. Good question. Four, when was the last time you strategically evaluated your current model and mode of operations? And if it hasn't been in the last 6 months, you should probably do it again.
A lot of folks would say never to that question.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I planted a church. I took a model that I saw from someone else or figured out one, and I put it in place, and 30 years have gone by. I mean, anything that we created before the internet should be blown up for sure. But I would argue anything that we created before the pandemic should probably be changed dramatically. So, and then, last one, today, this is the 4 critical questions, these, but today, what is working? What is not working? What's missing and what's confusing? Think if you can with honesty, answer those 4 questions. What's not working, what is working, what's missing, what's confusing. It will give you incredible clarity on how this disruption could be leveraged to work on something greater for the future.
Yeah, we ask those questions in a pretty much same way, but we ask those questions when we do Vision Day. And one of the things I want to say to the listener right now is it's really important you get outside eyes to come in and help you ask these questions. If you're the pastor of the church, one of the greatest things you can do, like even if you do a Vision Day like we do, is for you to remain quiet most of the day and listen to the input of your people. Because their perspective on things, their understanding of your mission. Again, if you don't know your mission, nothing else really matters because you don't know why you exist. And so you think that they all get it because you wrote something, as you said, 35 years ago. And even if you had something before the pandemic, it's changed. And so it's just very important. I'm so thankful for your helping us to understand the difference between an interruption and a disruption.
Of course.
That's going to be huge for our pastors moving forward. One of the things we'd love to do when we wrap up our podcast is ask this question. I'd love for you to answer it. We've got hundreds of small church pastors and leaders and mid-sized church pastors and leaders who listen to the podcast. If you were talking to them personally, sitting there having a cup of coffee, what's a word of encouragement, advice, or wisdom that you would share with them today to help them to get moving forward again?
Well, I think I would probably say, the most obvious one probably that everybody probably says is the minute we feel like this entire thing is on our shoulders, we've forgotten that God is way bigger than us, and it's bigger than our problems and bigger than our churches. And to your point, I mean, the movement of the ecclesia is going to continue to move no matter how big a pandemic or how big an issue is. So I think one, it's just remember that God's in charge of this thing, not me. I think the second thing is that we're all so uniquely gifted to do some things well, but none of us are uniquely gifted to do everything well.
Amen.
And so the more you can learn about how God uniquely made you, the better you will be able to start outsourcing or figuring out ways to surround yourself with some people, whether they're volunteers, part-time staff, whatever it may be, who are who do not have diversity of character, diversity of chemistry, but they do have diversity of skill set and capacities.
Mm-hmm.
So you can surround yourself with some people who love doing the things that you're not uniquely gifted to do. It frees you up as a leader and as a pastor to operate out of your strengths. I think that's one of the most critical things that a pastor can do.
I love that you said, basically simply just ask people.
Yes.
I mean, the worst thing they could do is say no. So
isn't that weird?
Advice.
I think we're so afraid to ask. I don't know if it's rejection or what it is, but you know what I learned in my journey of ministry. I guess I had 50 or 60 years total in point leadership. But when I didn't ask somebody if they could help with something, I wasn't asking because I was afraid of rejection. Meanwhile, I'm also potentially robbing them of an opportunity to grow closer to their Heavenly Father. Through participating in a local church, through giving, through all those things. And so I just decided a long time ago, I'm not going to rob other people of an opportunity. The worst thing is they're going to say, oh yeah, I don't want to do that. Oh, okay, that's fine. I'll ask somebody else.
No big deal.
Yeah. So I hate to think about how many people I might have robbed from an opportunity to really do something of significance because I was afraid of rejection myself. And so I wouldn't ask.
Pastor, if you're listening
Good
now,
advice.
I just want you to understand, God hasn't called you to do it all yourself, and you're going to continue to feel lost in the pressure of all of this if you continue to think it's about you. And I don't say that in a mean way, but it's not about you. We are called to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry, and I believe that one of the great results that will come on the backside, if there is a backside, Gavin, ever of this particular season, is that we begin to equip people, because if we don't, we're not going to make it.
Right.
We're not going to make it. So, man, thank you so much for taking the time to hang with us today. Your
very
wisdom,
welcome.
Your insight is amazing. I'm glad that we already had you locked in as a 95 Network contributor in our conference, and now you're a podcast. And we will, we'd like to circle back around from time to time with you again, because again,
sure,
like you said, there were multiple podcasts today. So thanks for taking the time to be with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.